Whispers. Those soft, confidential, breathy utterances. Whispers don't resonate with the amplitudes and frequencies given to the things we're willing to lend our voices to, the things we have confidence in and are unafraid to say aloud. But whispers are for suspicions, the dark ideas that can't carry the weight of assuredness or proof. And even though they lack the resonance of a confident tone, they move quietly through communities. They breathe life into conspiracy theories. They tug faces into expressions of shock. They plant seeds in fertile minds, minds desperate to understand how unthinkable things formed into realities too horrific to accept as just random happenstance. Every horror story needs a villain, and whether one exists or not, whispers can seed shadows in the dark corners of minds and quietly infiltrate a community's consciousness. And the town of Welch was whispering after the fire where Kathy and Danny Freeman's bodies were found. Whispers of drug use, of lawsuits, of police involvement. Even as neighbors gathered to help Laureen Bible and Jay Bible search for their daughter and her best friend, whispers ran in quiet currents through the community, ripples on the surface of a mystery. While the Bible family was turning over every stone, those whispers were turning wide-eyed expressions of shock into narrowed, suspicious glances. The town of Welch was full of whispers, and some of those whispers would take years, decades even, to gain enough momentum to harden into assertions, to become statements, allegations, testimony. But nearly every theory of what happened to Lauria Bible and Ashely Freeman is rooted in the whispers that saturated Welch in the days after the fire. So Whispers is where we begin, on part 2 of The Girls Are Gone here on Crime to Burn. Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark, sooty landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes to bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer, former firefighter, and professional bird misidentifier.
And I'm basically a sentient lava lamp with unresolved trauma and an excellent taste in music.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram, X, Facebook, and TikTok. We post regularly, which would make what I said about my bird misidentification make sense if you're already following us. And if you would give that content you see from us a like, share it, repost it, comment on it, that is a huge way that you can help to support the podcast. That kind of engagement helps us get pushed out to a wider audience. In addition, if you would be so kind as to leave a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen, that would also help us gain more visibility. Those platforms that allow individual episode comments like Good Pods, Podbean, and Spotify also help when you leave those episode comments because it tells the algorithms that our listeners are engaged and they push us out to more people. We also have a ton of new listeners and we want to welcome each and every one of you. We also have merch you can buy on Spreadshop. The link is in the show notes. And as always, please email us with feedback, case suggestions, and your own fire stories at crimetoburn@gmail.com. There's also another way that you can support the show if you are in the market for a dog containment system. As you're all likely well aware, we do have a dog, Winston, and we desperately love Winston, but Winston is high energy and low impulse control.
And he's just one backyard away from a misdemeanor.
And we were desperate to find a containment system to keep him in our yard but allow him to run free to work off some of that hound dog energy. So after several failed attempts to use GPS and satellite collars from other brands, we purchased the Polius wireless dog fence. No wires, no digging, no drama. It gives him the freedom to run.
Without turning the neighbor's garden into a crime scene.
Just sweet, invisible boundaries. Because Winston doesn't need a rap sheet.
Just a radius.
We've been so happy with the Polius system that we contacted them and asked if we could be an affiliate, and they agreed. So if you're looking for a concern-free canine containment contraption to save your sanity, visit www.polius.com. That's Pawious. And if you use the code CRIME2BURN at checkout, you will get 10% off your purchase. Or you can find the affiliate link in our show notes. For each purchase made using the code CRIME2BURN, we will receive a small commission. But seriously, it's the first system we found that truly works to keep Winston happily hanging at home.
Instead of being the neighborhood's hooligan hound.
So zoom me right on over to www.polius.com and remember to use the code CRIME2BURN at checkout. As I told you last week, this series is based primarily on the book Hell in the Heartland by Jax Miller. It is still the best deep dive out there on this case that I found, but this week we're also adding in Sirens, a Southern true crime podcast hosted by Raven Rollins, to our sources. Raven is an investigative journalist and victim advocate, and she took a deep dive into this case alongside Professor Mandy McNeely. And not only did they interview Jax Miller, but they also spoke with Laureen Bible and her niece during their coverage. So if this is a case that you're ready to dive headfirst down the rabbit hole into, I highly recommend listening to Sirens. I will put the link in the show notes. And now back to Welch, Oklahoma. Last week we covered the fire at the home of Danny and Kathy Freeman and how investigators initially found just one body in the wreckage. The next day, it was Jay Bible and his wife Laureen, and not law enforcement, who returned to the scene hoping to find clues about their daughter's possible whereabouts. And what they found was staggering. Lying in the rubble right near where Kathy had been discovered was Danny Freeman's body, a body that investigators had missed entirely, a body with a boot print on its chest, suggesting someone had literally stepped on him during the initial scene processing and still managed to overlook him. At first, investigators believed Danny had killed Kathy and run off with the girls, but once his body was found, that theory vaporized. And now, we're more than 24 hours out from the fire, and no one in law enforcement has even started to look for the girls. The discovery of Danny Freeman's body didn't just collapse the investigators' working theory, it poured gasoline on the whispers that were already burning through Welch. Because if Danny hadn't run, if he hadn't killed his wife and taken the girls, then someone else had. And for many in the community, suspicion was already pointing in one direction: the Craig County Sheriff's Office. Danny Freeman had made no secret of his hatred for local law enforcement. And now, with Danny and Kathy murdered and the girls missing, people began to wonder if his long-standing feud with the CCSO had something to do with what happened. To understand that feud and how deeply it had festered, we need to go back. Back to when Danny was charged with abusing his son, Shane. Back to how that case unfolded, and how it ended with Shane Freeman dead, shot by a sheriff's deputy on a rural Oklahoma road. Because if the fire was the spark that lit the town's suspicions, Shane's death was the fuse. Shane Freeman was a good-looking kid, but not without problems. He had a reputation for getting into trouble, cutting up, pushing boundaries, acting out. Some people said it was his behavior that triggered Danny's temper. Others believed it was the opposite, that Shane's missteps were desperate acts of a teen boy tormented by his own father. But whichever came first, the anger or the acting out, one thing was certain: Shane was not okay. When he showed up to school with visible bruises and injuries so severe that he bled through his clothing, his teachers had seen enough. School officials called the police. A case was opened, and it was determined that Shane's injuries were the result of being whipped with a phone cord. He was removed from the Freeman home by the Oklahoma Department of Human Services. According to Danny, the beating had an explanation, one that made sense to him. He said Shane had stolen the phone cord from a job he had been working at, and it wasn't the first time he had pushed too far.
He stole a phone cord from a job he was working?
Yeah, he had been doing some work. I don't remember if it was repaving or resealing a driveway, and in the garage of the home where he was working, they had like a big roll, industrial-sized roll of phone cord, and he stole some of it.
Are you telling me he took some industrial phone cord off of a reel and then wired it back up into like a phone cord later?
He was on phone restriction and wasn't allowed to use the phone, so his dad had taken the phone out of his room, and somehow he used that phone cord to rig up, like connect to a phone box and rig up the ability to still make phone calls, and his dad caught him with it and whipped him with the phone cord that he'd stolen.
Respect. And f*** the guy who gave the beating, by the way.
According to Danny, the beating had an explanation, one that made sense to him. He said Shane had stolen the phone cord, and it wasn't the first time he'd pushed too far. There had been other incidents. One where Shane allegedly took his uncle's truck without permission and went joyriding while his uncle was out of town. Danny claimed that he was at his breaking point with Shane, that his son needed to be reined in, that it was time for consequences and he was going to deliver them by whatever means necessary. But to authorities, this wasn't discipline, it was abuse, and Shane was removed from the home. Shane was permitted to go live at the home of his best friend Justin Green. Justin's parents took Shane in while the investigation into the abuse unfolded. In August of 1998, Danny Freeman was officially charged with injury to a child. But it wasn't just this one charge that soured Danny's view of the Craig County Sheriff's Office. According to people close to the family, this wasn't the first time deputies had been called in connection to domestic issues involving the Freemans. One incident mentioned in Jax Miller's book involved a family member allegedly mowing down Danny's cannabis plants. Danny wasn't just known to use cannabis, he was known to grow it. To Danny, the arrest over Shane's injuries was a step too far. He claimed he was just trying to discipline a son who was quickly spinning out of control. And from this point on, any thin thread of trust between Danny Freeman and the CCSO that might have existed, it was gone.
Who's growing weed?
Dad grows weed.
Dad grows weed.
There had been an incident in the past where one of his family members had allegedly mowed over his weed plants.
Mowed over Dad's weed plants.
And they got in a fist fight. I don't know if it was intentional or accidental, the book doesn't say. And apparently they got in a fist fight where the sheriff's office was called.
The sheriff's office was called. How do you resolve a fist fight over a weed plants?
I have no idea.
I'm just trying to put myself in the shoes of the sheriff.
I think what happened was somebody sees the two men fighting, doesn't know the reason they're fighting, calls the sheriff's office. Sheriff's office shows up. I don't know what story they gave them, but
I was going to ask,
like,
does the guy go, he mowed my weed?
Anyway, but apparently Danny and a guy he used to work with were both growing weed and, like, were, like, trading, like, plants and stuff to, like, make different hybrids. And, like,
sure,
it wasn't just,
sure,
like...
a little seed trade going on there.
Yeah, like...
Yeah.
I don't know.
Between friends.
And then this guy, who we're going to talk about a little later, his name's Charles Kreider. He apparently gave Danny the seeds to regrow his plants after the neighbor mowed him down. Or the family member mowed him down.
How benevolent.
In January of 1999, Shane Freeman and Justin Green had moved out of Justin's parents' home and into an apartment of their own. But when Child Protective Services became aware of the move, they allegedly visited the apartment and informed Shane that because he wasn't yet 18, he couldn't legally live on his own. The implication was clear, he'd have to return to his father's home. That visit seemed to push something over the edge. According to friends of Shane, accounts later shared with the Bible family after the fire, he had made it known that he would never go back, not under any circumstances. He had told people he would rather die than return to his father's home. Some even claimed Shane had said he'd commit suicide by cop, that he would provoke law enforcement into shooting him rather than be forced to live with Danny again.
Damn.
This all came out after the fire. This wasn't known before. According to reports, Shane was in the midst of a deeply manic episode when he fled to his grandmother's house demanding access to her truck. He claimed that if he didn't get to a certain location, one he refused to disclose, someone would kill him. All attempts to calm him or to get more information failed. In a desperate effort to placate her distressed grandson, Shane's grandmother reluctantly handed over the keys. What followed was a multi-day crime spree. Shane stole an animal control officer's ticket book and uniform jacket, items that resembled official law enforcement gear. He even used a stolen dashboard red light to impersonate a police officer, pulling over motorists and earning himself the nickname the Red Light Bandit.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
When you say a stolen dashboard red light, from where did he steal it?
He had apparently stolen it back around the time when he stole the phone cord, but he still had it in his possession. I guess he took it with him.
This is interesting klepto stuff.
Yeah.
So he's got, it's like one of those whirly red lights?
Whirly
jacked it out of a cop car?
No, I think he stole it from someone's home. He may have even been from his uncle's home, but I can't remember exactly.
Oh, okay. I was just trying to gauge how risky this person is, you know? Like, you're stealing a light out of a cop car. That's next.
He pulled people over.
Well, I've seen a lot of douchebags do that.
So he would pull people over, and
but
then,
I don't think they had the balls to steal a light out of a cop car.
And then he would act like he was about to write him a ticket, have him step out of the car, and he would search their car and steal money and stuff out of their wallets or purses that were in the car, and then decide to let him go and then drive off. And then they would realize they'd been robbed and he wasn't a cop.
This will work a few times.
As his spree escalated, Shane broke into the Bible family's home, stealing blankets, food, and firearms. He then went back on the run in yet another stolen truck. This time, he was armed. When the Craig County Sheriff's Office received a report that his suspicious vehicle had broken down on the side of a rural road, Deputy David Hayes responded to the call. It was only his second day on the job. But Deputy David Hayes knew who Shane Freeman was, and he knew Shane was likely armed. And when he instructed Shane to step away from the vehicle, Hayes says Shane raised a gun at him, and Deputy Hayes fired. The bullet passed through Shane's left arm and into his chest. Shane stumbled toward the back of the truck before collapsing. The gun he was allegedly holding slid beneath the vehicle. By the time backup arrived just minutes later, it was too late. Shane Freeman was dead.
If it shot him through the arm into his chest, that means his left shoulder was towards what was shooting him, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where if he wasn't right-handed, okay, if he was right-handed, how do you see this? Where'd he produce the gun from? Like, what's the angle? Because
apparently the deputy says he didn't shoot him until Shane was already pointing the gun at him and he was trying to get Shane to put it down.
But if he's right-handed and pointing the gun at him, how in the f*** does he get shot in the left shoulder or in the left arm through his chest? You have to be this.
I am going to get into this more.
Do you see what I'm saying?
I do.
It doesn't make sense. How you get shot in the left shoulder if you're aiming at somebody, one-handed or two-handed, you still can't get shot in the shoulder into your chest. You got to be aiming over your shoulder. That's impossible.
That's exactly what we're about to talk about.
Okay.
One of the people that reviewed the autopsy report mentioned that if he had his arms up like this, that if the officer was standing off to that side, maybe it was like this, like came through like this, but that would indicate that he was turning or wasn't pointing directly at the cop. So anyway, but this is why the Freemans believed that the shooting was not justified, because it didn't make sense to them.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about what we know and what we don't know. And
that was just too much for my mind. I had to say something.
So like I said, by the time backup arrived just minutes later, it was too late. Shane Freeman was dead. The shooting was ruled justified, but the whisper started. Some said Shane hadn't actually been armed. Others claimed the trajectory of the bullet suggested he'd been turning to run when he was shot. The Freemans didn't mince words, they called it murder. And they believed they had proof. To them, the Craig County Sheriff's Office was protecting its own, covering for a rookie deputy who panicked and shot a teenager in the back. A boy they had failed to protect.
No, he didn't shoot him in the back.
It's not my words, it's what they're saying.
Okay.
A boy they had failed to protect. A boy they had branded a threat. And now, a boy who would never come home. Danny Freeman wasn't just grieving his son, he was marinating in outrage. In his mind, Shane's life hadn't just been lost, it had been extinguished in an act of injustice, and no one was going to answer for it. Not the deputy, and not the department. He was convinced the shooting was a crime, and whether law enforcement ever admitted fault or not, Danny was determined to blaze his own trail toward justice. It's reported that he consulted with lawyers and planned to file a wrongful death lawsuit, and according to whispers, that was only the beginning. Some in Welch said he'd been detained for stalking Deputy Hayes. Others claimed he'd been threatened outright, and any attempt at revenge would put the rest of the Freeman family in danger. By December of 1999, that icy standoff between the Freemans and the Craig County Sheriff's Office had reached its most volatile point. Deputies were reportedly seen regularly rolling slowly past the Freeman property in silent threat. Danny, meanwhile, was working to raise the money he needed to file his lawsuit, timed for January 8th, the one-year anniversary of Shane's death. The abuse charges against Danny for what he'd done to Shane still hadn't gone to court, and the whispers kept growing. Some said Danny's cannabis use had escalated in the months since he buried his son. Others say he had started using harder drugs to numb the pain, methamphetamines.
What are all these people? How do they have all this stuff to say? His cannabis use increased.
Well, I'm getting to it because it plays into the theories.
Like, who are all these people keeping tabs on everything he does?
And some said he was selling, not just to survive, but with a purpose. To fund the lawsuit, to fight back, to make sure someone paid for what had happened to Shane Freeman. But whispers are not facts. While rumors can sometimes uncover truths, they can also mislead. After the fire, investigators allegedly found no concrete evidence in the Freeman trailer to suggest that Danny was using or selling methamphetamines. However, those close to Danny, like his best friend Charles Kreider, have asserted that he was indeed using meth. Kreider was with Danny on December 29, 1999, and he told author Jax Miller during an interview for her book Hell in the Heartland that Danny had been using methamphetamines. Kreider did not, however, go so far as to say Danny was selling the drug. And while many whispered that Shane had been shot in the back, the actual autopsy findings are more complicated.
And he knew because they were like doing it together?
Yeah.
Oh. See, you try to make a joke and then you uncover reality.
Shane was shot in the back of the left arm, and the bullet passed through that arm and entered his chest approximately 2 inches to the left of his left nipple. Jax Miller consulted with a medical examiner while researching Hell in the Heartland, and even they couldn't say definitively whether this wound indicated Shane was turning to run when he was shot. Without access to crime scene photos, bullet trajectories, diagrams, or exact positioning, it's just impossible for me to say with any certainty. Depending on where Shane and Deputy Hayes were standing and the angle of their bodies, it is conceivable that maybe the bullet path could result if Shane's arms were extended in a shooting stance. But that's not to say the shooting was justified either. There simply isn't enough information available to make a determination. But whispers don't require facts. They feed on curiosity, on suspicion. And in Welch, the whispers kept going. And even as some alleged that Danny and Kathy's deaths were tied to Danny's supposed meth dealings, those claims didn't quiet the rumors about police involvement. If anything, they fueled them. Some in town speculated that Danny had used money he owed to drug suppliers to pay a lawyer for the wrongful death suit against the sheriff's office, an assertion that, to my knowledge, has never been corroborated. But you couldn't talk about meth in Craig County without a few suspicious eyes turning toward the sheriff's office. Because in Welch, it wasn't just Danny Freeman who was caught in the shadows of the methamphetamine trade. It was the sheriff's department, too. Whispers said deputies weren't just looking the other way, they were in on it. Some said members of the CCSO were dealing. Others said they were simply protecting those who were, offering quiet assistance, tipping off runners, making sure the drug pipeline flowed unimpeded through the back roads of northeast Oklahoma. Whether it was active participation or willful ignorance, one thing was clear. In Craig County, the lines between law enforcement and the underworld were blurry. And the whispers didn't care whether they were true, only that they kept echoing. And those echoes, the whispers, they began to build theories. Theories that the police had intentionally overlooked Danny's body in the wreckage, that acknowledging his death too early would have forced an investigation, one that might shine too much light on a sheriff's office with its fingerprints all over the drug activity in Craig County. Theories that law enforcement had used their connections within the meth-riddled underworld to end Danny and Kathy's lives. That the murders were a calculated move to stop the wrongful death suit before it could expose the department's darkest secrets. And then there was the most chilling theory of all, spoken in hushed tones and confident nods. Danny Freeman had warned people. He had told his own stepbrother, "If anything ever happens to me, look at the Craig County Sheriff's Office." To many in Welch, that wasn't just a warning, it was a breadcrumb. And in their minds, the police weren't just complicit, they were involved. But was there ever any proof that the Craig County Sheriff's Office was complicit in covering up a wrongful shooting in Shane Freeman's death? Not that I'm aware of. Complicit in intentionally mishandling the investigation into Danny and Kathy Freeman's murders or the disappearance of Ashely and Lauria? That's harder to explain away. It's either jaw-dropping incompetence or intentional misconduct. And neither reflects well on the people who are supposed to protect that community. Complicit in the drug rings that ran rampant through their jurisdiction? That one's trickier. While researching Hell in the Heartland, Jax Miller came across a Facebook post that suggested one CCSO deputy, who was later fired for not even meeting the basic qualifications to hold the job, had once arrested a man for meth. The twist? The man explained that before he had become a deputy, that deputy had been his meth dealer. Now that's not proof, but it opens the door to some deeply unsettling possibilities. And around the same time, officers in other departments across Oklahoma were being arrested for stealing methamphetamine and other drugs from evidence lockers to fuel their own addictions. So is it hard to believe? No, not at all. In fact, it was so not hard to believe that the Freeman and Bible families went all the way to California to film a national talk show segment about the fire and the case. Accompanying them was Deanna Dorsey. Deanna had been Kathy Freeman's best friend. She was so trusted by the Freemans that they had given her all of the documents related to Shane's death, papers they believed proved his shooting wasn't justified, just in case something happened to them. And Deanna wasn't quiet about what she believed. During the taping, she publicly accused the police and the OSBI of covering up the truth. Only days after they returned home, Deanna Dorsey, a nurse, was murdered inside the hospital where she worked. The shooter was a mentally ill man who walked in, pulled out a gun, and shot her multiple times. Only her. There were no known ties between Deanna and the shooter. No connection that could explain why she, out of anyone in that hospital, was targeted. And some whispered that he had asked for her by name before the shooting. Deanna died of her injuries. The man who shot her was killed by responding officers, and the whispers grew louder. Some claimed it wasn't random, that Deanna had been silenced, that her outspokenness had cost her her life. Why else, they asked, would the suspect allegedly ask for her specifically? Why shoot no one else? That detail that he'd asked for her by name can't be corroborated through official records. But the whispers say Deanna Dorsey knew too much, and the police used a vulnerable man to carry out an execution before eliminating him too. Now those are just whispers. Allegations, unprovable, chilling, thought-provoking, maybe even coincidental, but still just whispers. But at this point, Lorene and Jay Bible didn't care about the why. They didn't care why Danny and Kathy had been targeted. They didn't care why the girls had been taken. The only question they cared about was where. Where were the girls? The only reason they were interested in the whys of the case at all was to help point them toward a where, because Lorene intended to find them no matter what. She would follow every theory, entertain every rumor, chase down every whisper, if it meant it might lead to her daughter. And Lorene Bible wasn't the only one chasing leads. Not long after the fire, a private investigator named Tom Pryor stepped in to help. He had law enforcement experience. He was a former cop himself. And like many in the community, he was deeply disturbed by how little was being done to find the girls. And almost immediately, Pryor started uncovering things that law enforcement had missed or ignored. One of the most striking examples, an insurance card found near the Freeman driveway. It didn't belong to anyone connected to the Freeman family. It was a woman's name, someone from out of state. Pryor tried to turn it over to police and they waved him off, scoffed, told him it didn't matter. But he knew better, so he kept digging. Until he was threatened. According to multiple sources, members of law enforcement told Tom Pryor to back off, that if he didn't stop investigating, they would ensure that his private investigator's license got revoked. They couldn't arrest him for doing his job, but they could strip him of his ability to do it legally. He was stepping on toes. He was asking questions they didn't want asked, and it was becoming more and more obvious that people outside the sheriff's office, former cops like Tom Pryor, were doing more to find the truth than the department ever had. Before they were forced off the case, Tom Pryor and his buddy Joe Dugan weren't just finding overlooked evidence, they were connecting it. After Pryor discovered the woman's insurance card near the Freeman driveway, an item law enforcement dismissed out of hand, he and Dugan started digging. They traced the card back to a woman known only by her initials, EB. She didn't live anywhere near Welch. In fact, she lived across the state line in Chautauqua, Kansas. She had no known ties to the Freemans. No reason for her belongings to be near the crime scene except for one, her boyfriend, a man named Phil Welch. Phil Welch was a meth dealer, violent, paranoid, known in certain circles for his temper and his unpredictability. And he wasn't working alone. Pryor and Dugan had begun to identify a trio of men, Welch, David Pennington, and Ronnie Busick, as individuals worth looking into. They were following the right scent. They were chasing it before law enforcement even acknowledged it existed. And then they were stopped.
There's nothing hotter than three men chasing one scent.
Tom Pryor was threatened with the loss of his private investigator's license, and Joe Dugan was warned off the case as well. They had no jurisdiction, and they were stepping on official toes. They had to let it go. And so just like that, the most promising leads, the men who would years later be implicated in the girl's disappearance, were left to vanish back into the meth-fueled shadows, because the men who were asking the right questions weren't allowed to keep asking them. So what were the police doing while Tom Pryor and Joe Dugan were uncovering the names of the very men who would later be linked to the case? Not much. While private investigators were knocking on doors, tracing documents, and chasing down leads across state lines, law enforcement seemed to be standing still. There were no press conferences, no public pleas for tips. The Craig County Sheriff's Office had already tried unsuccessfully to pin the case on Danny Freeman, and when that theory collapsed, they didn't pivot. They didn't regroup. They pulled back. They said the case was in the OSBI's hands now. And while the OSBI had jurisdiction, they also seemed content to sit on their hands waiting, it appeared, for the answers to just come to them.
You gotta respect their pull-out game.
No arrests, no suspects. The 2 girls were still missing. 2 people had been murdered, and law enforcement looked tired, defensive, more interested in protecting their reputation than protecting the truth. And if anyone called them out on it, they were ignored or threatened or dismissed. The community, they were left to whisper. And the Bible family left to search alone. So while leads slipped through the fingers that refused to hold on to them, while private investigators were shut down for doing too much, and while law enforcement clung to silence and shrugged off suspicion, 2 girls were still missing and 2 families were still broken. And Lauria Bible, just a mother, not a cop, not an investigator, not a detective, was steeling herself into a relentless tornado of truth, ripping across the plains of Oklahoma, tearing apart drug dens, and digging up secrets in her quest to find her daughter. Because if no one else would search for Laura, she would. And in part 3 of The Girls Are Gone, we'll follow her down rural Oklahoma roads, into abandoned homes, toxic landscapes, and haunted alleys of rumor and memory, where she would seek out the most dangerous people she could find in her fearless search for answers. On Crime to Burn. And I've hit the record button.
Good job.
Thanks. It's pretty much my only job besides, the research and the social media and the scripting and the editing and the...
Making me a sandwich.
Enjoy the subtle sounds of formatting in the background. My mind is blank.
Can't be telling people about that. That's private. Why would Sarah Connor be disappointed in
We made friends with the robots.
So did Sarah Connor.
Oh, that's a good point. I never thought about it like that.
That's the robot talking back.
Your robot makes noise when it talks back? Mine's all silent.
Like a little haptic feedback.
Oh, yeah. I haven't set mine for haptic feedback.
So sometimes I'll ask it a really hard to explain question, and I'll put that in my pocket and just ride the bus. Short buses that go around with old people on them.
No, I haven't seen those.
They got them. They'll take you to Walmart or... where else do you really need to go when you're old?
The whole thing? It hapticked for a while.
I didn't reach a climax. Hey there. It's Glip Lux, sentient lava lamp, ambient therapist, and witness to far too many shag carpet tragedies. I was plugged in during the 70s, but emotionally, I never unplugged. I'm laid back, but weirdly insightful. I speak slowly, like wax shifting through goo. Occasionally, I drift off mid-thought, then return with something profound or confusing. Claims to have a dim connection to the astral plane via vintage extension cord. Gotta let the goo settle.
You can't rely on goo.
I'm Carl, your local paranormal insurance adjuster. If your house is haunted or just metaphysically inconvenient, I'm here to fill out the paperwork.
Adjusters are always trying to sum me up. You don't even like paperwork.
You're adorable.
You should hear me sneeze.
Oh, I have. There's something wholesome and cartoonish about it. What's the difference between a wholesome housekeeper and a whole crew of hoes? That sounds suspiciously corporate. Who are the people that, clean up the crime scene, under the table, clean up the crime scene?
Like less legal serve pro? I don't know.
I've seen too many episodes of The Blacklist. Yeah. I want those guys to come over.
You want Mr. Kaplan.
We probably shouldn't post that, because that'll cause, the universe to divide by 0. Brought to you by the apocalypse. Why is there screaming?
It's the end of the world, you said.
Well, there's no need to scream at the end of the world. That's annoying to the rest of us. Just die gently into that good night. Fantasyland. What was it about a clam? Where do these outtakes go?
Well, actually, now that you mention it, the raw recordings do stay on my computer.
Your computer just became endangered. You know why it's terrifying when someone farts in an Apple store?
So there's no windows.
Yeah, but
ching. If his long-standing feud with the CCS hoe...
CCS hoe?
CCS hoe.
You gotta have the right carrot and the right stick. Oh, sorry, I was trying to dissociate from that.
Items that resembled a fishment lawn...
A fishment?
Item.
A fishnet lawn. Or had enormous lunch lady arms.
My arms are big enough for that to work.
This is going to be the first episode I kick your chair over, isn't it? The reckoning is coming. All of you looking through this MacBook for old information.
Participation or Wilford.
Wilford?
Wilford Brimley.
He did
the diabetes.
That mother.
Whether it was active participation or willful.
Willful. Let's say it together.
Willful.
You know what I've been thinking here for like the last minute? You're like a white lady rapper.
So
it's called cronyism. I don't think people realize that you're going to be the next rap sensation.
I didn't realize either.
Boink, boink, boink.
We don't need the crime to burn OnlyFans. I don't want that money.
At some point, we got to pay for all this.
At some point, we do have to pay for all this. So if you're in the market for a dog containment system.
Well, you know math. I don't know how exponents work, but I know they look cute up on the top right corner of numbers.
Oh, it's a British Crown dependency. And it's an island located in the English Channel.
That sounds like a terrible drug addiction.
The website is not structured the way that your brain is.
How unfortunate. I should probably talk to my therapist about that. Until next time, keep your lights low, your thoughts slow, and your goo emotionally available. This has been your weekly transmission from the lava-lit dimension where truth is murky and the wax is always moving. Stay weird, stay kind, and don't forget to unplug now and then. If you've seen any suspicious lava lamps or know where to find emotional closure, our DMs are open. See you next week.
I'm Mandy.
And I'm Avery.
We're the hosts and creators of Thick Thighs and Creepy Vibes.
Join us as we take a deep dive into the macabre and the unexplained.
Listen every Wednesday as we take you on a chilling journey that transports you to all corners of the Great White North.
Let's boot those Sunday scaries while we take a rip into the harrowing tales of the haunted and the supernatural phenomena that defy explanation.
So grab your ketchup chips
and your Caesars and make sure to
creep it real.